Liar, he spat, the word a diamond bullet. Not for claiming 9 languages, but for daring to breathe the same air. Danielle's chin tilted, rage coiling. 6 months scrubbing his world, and still invisible. He thought she was nothing. A waitress, a nobody. But she knew his secrets, whispered in Mandarin, Russian, languages he'd never bothered to learn. She knew about the crumbling deals, the offshore accounts. Things were about to get interesting. Underestimate her? They all did. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Comment your city below and hit subscribe to join our global community. This story has an ending that will blow your mind. Danielle pressed her palm against the polished marble counter, feeling the cool surface ground her as she took a slow, steadying breath. The dining room of Liardada stretched before her like a glittering stage, crystal chandeliers casting soft golden light over pristine white tablecloths, silver cutlery arranged with geometric precision, and the low murmur of conversations spoken in hushed, expensive tones. This was the kind of place where people came not just to eat, but to be seen, to make deals, to flaunt their wealth with casual elegance. And Danielle, she was here to survive. Tell 12 needs their wine refilled, Marcus, the floor manager, said as he passed her, his voice sharp with impatience. And table 7 is waiting for their appetizers. Move faster, Danielle. This isn't a diner. She bit back a retort, nodded, and smoothed the front of her crisp black uniform. 6 months. She'd been working at Liarden for 6 months, and every day felt like walking a tight rope. One mistake, one complaint from a guest, and she'd be out. Jobs like this didn't come easy for someone like her, a college dropout with no connections, no safety net, and a resume that screamed desperation. But she was good at this, better than good. She could read people, anticipate their needs before they voiced them, and navigate the complex social dynamics of a high-end restaurant with the skill of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning to adapt. Languages, especially languages, had always been her escape, her obsession, the one thing she could control when everything else in her life felt chaotic. She grabbed the bottle of Bordeaux from the bar and made her way to table 12, weaving through the dining room with practiced grace. The couple seated there, a silver-haired man in a tailored suit and a woman dripping in diamonds, barely glanced at her as she refilled their glasses, invisible. That's what she was here, a shadow moving through their world, unnoticed unless she made a mistake. Merci, the man said absently, his attention already back on his companion. Danielle smiled, professional and polite. Durham, monsieur. She turned and headed toward the kitchen, but a burst of laughter from the entrance caught her attention. A group of men had just walked in, and even from across the room, she could feel the shift in atmosphere. The hostess straightened her posture. The other servers glanced over, curious. Whoever these men were, they carried weight. Her eyes landed on the one in the center, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair perfectly styled, and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from stone. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year, and he moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Marcus appeared at her side, his voice low and urgent. "That's Marcus Hale," he said, his tone a mix of awe and anxiety. "CEO of Hale Industries. He's here for a business dinner. Whatever he wants, you give it to him." "Understood." Danielle nodded, her stomach tightening. She knew the name. Everyone did. Hale Industries was one of the largest tech companies in the country, and Marcus Hale was its golden boy. Young, ruthless, and brilliant. The kind of man who could make or break careers with a single decision. "Table 9, Marcus said, gesturing toward the corner booth. "You're on it." Great. Clear's throat. She watched as the group settled into their seats, their conversation loud and boisterous, filled with the easy camaraderie of men who knew they owned the room. Marcus Hale sat at the head of the table, his expression calm and controlled, a stark contrast to the energy around him. He scanned the room with sharp, calculating eyes, taking in every detail as if assessing the value of everything he saw. Danielle grabbed her notepad and approached the table, her pulse quickening despite herself. Stay professional. Stay invisible. Good evening, gentlemen, she said, her voice warm but measured. Welcome to Ljarden. My name is Danielle, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink? One of the men, a stocky guy with a booming laugh, leaned back in his chair. Champagne, the good stuff. We're celebrating. Of course, Danielle said, jotting it down. Any preferences? Dom Perrin, another man chimed in, and keep it coming. She nodded and turned her attention to Marcus, who was studying the menu with the same intensity most people reserved for legal contracts. And for you, sir? He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. His were a piercing shade of blue, cold and assessing, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. He didn't smile. Water, he said simply. Still not sparkling. And bring the wine list. Of course, Danielle replied, keeping her expression neutral. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Wait. She turned back, her heart skipping a beat. Yes. He gestured to the menu. What do you recommend? It was a simple question, but the way he asked it felt like a test. She could feel the other men at the table watching her, waiting to see how she'd respond. This was her moment to either prove herself or fade back into invisibility. Danielle took a breath and met his gaze directly. The seared duck breast with the cherry reduction is exceptional, she said, her voice steady. Chef pairs it with roasted root vegetables and a light J that doesn't overpower the flavor of the duck itself. If you prefer something lighter, the sea base is also excellent, flaky, delicate, and served with a lemon butter sauce that's perfectly balanced. Marcus studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he closed the menu and handed it to her. I'll take the duck. Excellent choice, she said, jotting it down. And for the rest of the table? The other men rattled off their orders, and Danielle wrote quickly, her mind already organizing the sequence of courses, the timing, the little details that would make this dinner seamless. When she finished, she gave them a polite smile and headed toward the bar. As she placed the drink order, she caught sight of Marcus again, watching her from across the room. His gaze was intense, almost unsettling, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. She turned away, forcing herself to focus. This was just another table, just another customer, nothing more. But as the evening wore on, she found herself hyper-aware of his presence. Every time she approached the table, she could feel his eyes on her, tracking her movements with that same calculating intensity. It wasn't flirtatious or warm. It was clinical, as if he were analyzing her, cataloguing every detail. When she brought out the entree, one of the men, a loud, red-faced executive, looked up at her with a grin. You speak French, huh? He said, his words slightly slurred from the champagne. That's cute. You take a class in high school or something. Danielle sat down his plate with practiced precision. Actually, I'm fluent, she said lightly. French is one of 9 languages I speak. The table went quiet. The red-faced man laughed loud and obnoxious. 9 languages? Yeah, right. What are you, a spy? Danielle kept her expression calm, but inside she felt a spark of irritation. No, just someone who enjoys learning. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. 9 languages, he repeated, his tone flat and skeptical. That's quite a claim. She met his eyes, refusing to flinch. It's not a claim, it's a fact. He set down his fork, his attention fully on her now. All right, he said, his voice cool and challenging. Prove it. Say something in Mandarin. Danielle didn't hesitate. One of the men pulled out his phone, typing quickly. A moment later he looked up, surprised. She said, "You think I'm lying, but I don't need to prove anything to you." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Lucky guess. Try another. Russian, she offered, her tone deceptively sweet. Yamu Narus. Or maybe Italian. The table stared at her, stunned into silence. All except Marcus, whose expression had gone from skeptical to something darker, something that looked almost like anger. "You're telling me," he said slowly, his voice dangerously low, "that a waitress in a restaurant speaks 9 languages fluently." The word waitress came out like an insult, dripping with condescension. Danielle felt the sting of it, but she kept her composure. "I'm telling you that I speak 9 languages," she said calmly. "What I do for a living doesn't change that." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't believe you." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Danielle's pulse quickened, but she refused to let him see her rattled. "That's your prerogative," she said evenly, "but it doesn't make it any less true." He smirked, cold and dismissive. "No, I think you're lying. I think you memorized a few phrases to impress people, and now you're trying to pass yourself off as some kind of genius. It's pathetic." The other men at the table shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. They were watching this unfold like spectators at a gladiator match, curious to see who would break first. Danielle felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, but she forced it down. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She couldn't afford to let him win. "I'm not lying," she said quietly, her voice steadied despite the storm building inside her. "But I don't need to convince you. Enjoy your meal, Mr. Hale." She turned to walk away, but his voice followed her low and mocking. "Run along, Danielle, and next time, try to be honest." She didn't look back, but as she walked toward the kitchen, her hands trembling with suppressed rage, she made a promise to herself. He was going to regret this. Chapter 2. The kitchen was a blur of noise and motion, pots clanging, chefs shouting orders in rapid-fire French, the hiss of butter melting in hot pans. Danielle pushed through the swinging doors and leaned against the wall, pressing her palms flat against the cool tile as she tried to steady her breathing. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through her veins like fire. "You okay?" asked Marco, one of the line cooks, glancing over at her with concern. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a perpetually flour-dusted apron. "Fine," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just needed a second." He studied her for a moment, then nodded and returned to his station. Danielle closed her eyes and counted to 10, willing herself to calm down. She couldn't let Marcus Hale get under her skin. He was just another arrogant, rich man who thought money gave him the right to treat people like dirt. She'd dealt with worse, but the way he'd looked at her like she was nothing, like her accomplishments meant nothing, it stung more than she wanted to admit. She'd worked so hard to get where she was. Every language she'd learned had been a lifeline, a way to pull herself up from the poverty that had defined her childhood. And to have him dismiss it all with a smirk and a few cutting words, it felt like a slap in the face. Danielle. Marcus, the floor manager, appeared beside her, his expression tight with stress. "Table 9 needs their dessert menu, and Mr. Hale asked for you specifically." Her stomach dropped. "Why?" I don't know and I don't care, Marcus snapped. Just go. And whatever you do, don't screw this up. That man could shut us down with a single bad review. Danielle swallowed hard and nodded, and she grabbed the dessert menus and made her way back into the dining room, her pulse quickening with every step. The table was quieter now, the boisterous energy from earlier replaced with a more subdued atmosphere. The other men were talking in low voices, their conversation peppered with technical jargon. She only half understood. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and alert. When he saw her approaching, he set down his glass and leaned back in his chair, his gaze tracking her movements with unnerving precision. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Can I interest you in our dessert menu this evening? We have a chocolate soule that's quite popular, as well as a seasonal fruit tart." "And actually," Marcus interrupted, his tone casual, but with an edge that made her pause. "I have a question for you, Danielle." She met his gaze, refusing to let him see how much he'd rattled her. "Of course. What can I help you with?" He steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. "You said you speak 9 languages. I'm curious. What are they?" It was a trap. She could feel it, but she wasn't about to back down now. "English, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Russian, German, Italian, Portuguese, and Japanese," she said evenly, listing them off without hesitation. One of the men at the table whistled, impressed despite himself. "That's actually insane. How the hell did you learn all of those?" Danielle kept her eyes on Marcus, refusing to let him intimidate her. "I started learning Spanish when I was a kid," she said, her voice calm but firm. "My grandmother was from Mexico, and she spoke to me in Spanish every day. After she died, I kept learning. It became a way to feel connected to her, I guess. And then I just kept going. French in high school, Mandarin in college, Russian online. The rest came gradually over the years. Languages have always made sense to me in a way that other things didn't." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharpening. "And you learned all of that while working as a waitress?" There it was again, that dismissive tone, as if her job somehow negated her intelligence. Danielle's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I learned all of that while working 3 jobs to pay for college, actually," she said quietly. "And when I ran out of money and had to drop out, I kept learning on my own. Because learning doesn't require a degree or a trust fund, Mr. Hale. It just requires curiosity and determination." And the table went silent. For a moment, something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. But it was gone before she could be sure. He leaned back in his chair, his expression once again unreadable. "Interesting," he said, his tone non-committal. "So, if you're so smart, why are you here? Why aren't you using those skills in a career?" The question felt like a punch to the gut, but Danielle refused to let him see her flinch. "Because life doesn't always go the way you plan," she said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Not all of us have the luxury of choosing our path. Some of us have to take what we can get and make the best of it." Marcus studied her for a long moment, his gaze penetrating and intense. Then, to her surprise, he nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he said. "But if you're as talented as you claim, you're wasting your potential here." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something. A crack in the armor, however small. "I appreciate the observation," Danielle said, her tone carefully neutral. "Now, can I get you anything else?" "Dessert. Coffee." "Coffee," Marcus said. "Black, no sugar." She nodded and turned to the rest of the table, taking their orders with the same professional efficiency she'd maintained all evening. But as she walked away, she could feel Marcus's eyes on her again, watching her with that same unsettling intensity. What was his angle? Why did he care? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She brought out desserts, refilled drinks, and cleared plates, all while trying to ignore the weight of Marcus Hale's gaze. By the time the table finally settled their bill and left, she was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. Dealing with men like him always drained her in a way that long shifts and difficult customers never did. She was wiping down a table near the back of the dining room when she heard the commotion at the entrance. Raised voices, sharp and urgent, cutting through the soft hum of the restaurant. Danielle looked up to see Marcus Hale standing near the hostess stand, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression dark with frustration. "I don't care what the translator says," he was saying, his voice low but forceful. "The deal is off if we can't get this sorted out. I'm not signing a contract when I don't understand half the terms." One of his colleagues, a nervous-looking man in wire-rimmed glasses, hovered nearby, his face pale with anxiety. "Marcus, we need this deal. If we walk away now, we lose millions. The Chinese investors are already on edge. Then find someone who can translate the contract properly." Marcus snapped, cutting him off. "I'm not putting my signature on something I can't read." Danielle paused. Her curiosity piqued. She glanced toward the hostess stand and saw a thick stack of papers in Marcus's hand, covered in dense blocks of Chinese characters. A contract, she realized, and from the look of it, a complex one. She hesitated, her instincts wearing with her pride. This wasn't her problem. Marcus Hale had made it abundantly clear what he thought of her. Why should she help him? But then she thought about the way he'd looked at her earlier, the flicker of something in his eyes when she'd stood up to him. Maybe he wasn't as irredeemable as she'd thought, and more importantly, maybe this was her chance to prove him wrong. Before she could talk herself out of it, she set down her cloth and walked over to the hostess stand. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I couldn't help but overhear. If you need someone to translate that contract, I can help." Marcus looked up, his expression shifting from frustration to surprise. "You?" "Yes, me," Danielle said, meeting his gaze head-on. "Mandarin is one of the 9 languages I speak, remember?" For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to decide whether to trust her. Then he glanced at his colleague, who shrugged helplessly, and back at Danielle. "Fine," Marcus said, handing her the contract. "But if you screw this up, I won't," Danielle said, cutting him off. She took the papers and flipped through them quickly, her eyes scanning the dense text with practiced ease. It was a joint venture agreement, filled with legal jargon and technical terms. But she'd seen contracts like this before during her brief stint in college business classes. She pulled out a pen from her apron and began marking key sections, translating them into English in the margins. Marcus and his colleague watched in silence, their expressions shifting from skepticism to cautious hope. After several minutes, Danielle looked up. "The main issue is here," she said, pointing to a clause buried near the middle of the contract. "This section gives the Chinese investors majority control over intellectual property rights. Essentially, they are asking you to hand over ownership of any technology developed through this partnership." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What?" "It's buried in the language," Danielle continued, her voice steady. "But it's there. If you sign this as is, you'll be giving them legal claim to everything your company creates under this deal." The colleague's face went white. That's not what they told us. They said it was a standard partnership agreement." Danielle flipped to another page. There's also a non-compete clause here that would prevent you from working with any other Chinese firms for 5 years. And this section, she tapped another paragraph, allows them to unilaterally terminate the agreement with only 30 days' notice, but you're locked in for the full term. Marcus took the contract from her hands, his jaw tight as he read the sections she'd marked, his expression darkened with every line. "Those bastards," he muttered under his breath. Then he looked up at Danielle, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You're sure about this?" "Positive," Danielle said. "The translation is accurate. I can write it out in full if you need documentation." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and for the first time that evening, she saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. Respect, maybe even gratitude. "You just saved me from losing everything," he said quietly. Danielle shrugged, trying to downplay the surge of satisfaction she felt. "Just doing what I can," she said. "Like I said, I speak 9 languages. Marcus's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Almost. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now, let's see what happens next." Chapter 3. Danielle didn't expect to see Marcus Hale again. Men like him didn't return to the same restaurant twice. They moved through the world like sharks, always hunting for the next big opportunity, the next conquest. So when she walked into Lyada 3 days later and saw him seated at table 9, alone this time, reading something on his tablet with the same intense focus he brought to everything, her heart did an unwelcome flip. She paused near the hostess stand, debating whether to ask someone else to take his table. But Marcus, the floor manager, appeared beside her before she could make a decision. "Mr. Hale requested you specifically," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "He's been waiting for you to arrive." Danielle's stomach tightened. "Did he say why?" Marcus shrugged. "No, but whatever you did the other night, it made an impression. Don't screw it up." She took a deep breath and made her way across the dining room, her pulse quickening with every step. Marcus looked up as she approached, and for a moment their eyes met. His expression was unreadable. But there was something different about him today. Less guarded, maybe, or simply less hostile. "Good evening, Mr. Hale," she said, stopping beside his table. "Back so soon?" He set down his tablet and leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same penetrating gaze. "I wanted to talk to you," he said simply. About the other night." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Danielle glanced around the restaurant, acutely aware that sitting with a customer was against protocol, but the dining room was quiet, and Marcus's expression made it clear he wasn't taking no for an answer. She slid into the chair, folding her hands in her lap. "If this is about the contract, it's not," Marcus interrupted. "Well, not entirely. You saved me from making a catastrophic mistake. That contract would have destroyed everything I've built. My lawyers reviewed it this morning, and they confirmed everything you said. The Chinese investors were trying to screw me over, and I was about to let them." Danielle inclined her head slightly. "I'm glad I could help." "Help?" Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "You did more than help. You saved my company, and I was onto you earlier that night. I called you a liar. I dismissed you without giving you a chance to prove yourself. I was wrong." The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected and raw. Danielle studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity, but his expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. "Why did you do that?" she asked quietly. Why did you assume I was lying? Marcus's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might deflect. But then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him look younger, less polished. Because I'm used to people lying to me, he said, his voice low and bitter. In my world, everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. And when someone shows up claiming to be exceptional, 9 times out of 10, they're exaggerating or outright lying to get ahead. I've been burned before, and I guess I assumed you were just another opportunist. Danielle felt a pang of sympathy despite herself. I'm not an opportunist, she said. I'm just someone trying to survive. And I know that now, Marcus said, meeting her gaze. And I'm sorry. You didn't deserve the way I treated you. The apology was sincere, and it caught her off guard. Men like Marcus Hale didn't apologize, at least not in her experience. They doubled down, made excuses, or simply moved on without acknowledging their mistakes. But here he was, sitting across from her, admitting he'd been wrong. Apology accepted, she said after a moment. Marcus nodded, his expression softening slightly. Good, because I have a proposition for you. Danielle's guard went up immediately. What kind of proposition? A job, Marcus said. At Hale Industries, we need someone with your skills, someone who can navigate international deals, translate documents, and communicate with partners across multiple languages. You're wasted here, Danielle. You should be using your talents in a place where they're valued. For a moment, she just stared at him, too stunned to respond. A job at Hale Industries. It was the kind of opportunity people spent years working toward, the kind of offer that could change her life overnight. But it also felt too good to be true. Why? She asked, her voice cautious. Why would you offer me a job? You don't know anything about me. I know enough, Marcus said. I know you're smart, resourceful, and capable under pressure. I know you have skills that most people spend decades trying to acquire, and I know you're honest, brutally so if the other night was any indication. That's exactly the kind of person I need on my team. Danielle's mind raced. This was everything she'd been working toward. A chance to use her skills to build a career, to escape the cycle of dead-end jobs and financial instability. But it also felt like stepping into a trap. Marcus Hale was powerful, intimidating, and unpredictable. Could she really work for someone like him? I need time to think about it, she said finally. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fair enough, but don't take too long. I'm not known for my patience. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. My direct line, call me when you've made a decision. Danielle picked up the card, her fingers brushing against the embossed lettering. Marcus Hale, CEO, Hale Industries. It felt surreal holding this small piece of paper that represented a doorway to a completely different life. Thank you, she said quietly. Marcus stood, gathering his tablet and coat. Don't thank me yet, he said, his tone lightly teasing. Working for me isn't easy. I have high standards and I don't tolerate excuses. But if you're as good as I think you are, you'll thrive. He paused, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. I hope you say yes, Danielle. I think we could do great things together. And with that, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her sitting alone at the table, her heart pounding and her mind spinning with possibilities. Over the next few days, Danielle couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's offer. She carried his business card with her everywhere, pulling it out during quiet moments to stare at the simple black lettering. Part of her wanted to call him immediately, to seize the opportunity before it slipped away. But another part, the part that had learned to be cautious, to question every offer that seemed too good to be true, held her back. She talked to her roommate, Maria, a nurse who'd been her closest friend since high school. They sat in their tiny apartment, drinking cheap wine and dissecting every angle of the situation. "Are you insane?" Maria said, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He's offering you a job at one of the biggest tech companies in the country. Why are you even hesitating?" "Because I don't know him," Danielle said, swirling her wine. "What if this is some kind of power play? What if he's just trying to control me or use me for something?" Maria rolled her eyes. "Or maybe he's just a guy who recognizes talent when he sees it. Not everyone has a hidden agenda, Danny. In my experience, they do." "Then maybe it's time to take a risk," Maria said gently. "You've been working dead-end jobs for years, barely scraping by. This could be your chance to actually build something, to use all those languages you've been studying. Don't let fear hold you back." Danielle knew Maria was right, but fear was a powerful thing, and she'd spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that the idea of taking a leap felt terrifying. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her interactions with Marcus in her mind, the way he'd challenged her, the way he'd apologized, the way he'd looked at her when he said he thought they could do great things together. There was something about him, something intense and magnetic that both drew her in and set off every alarm bell in her head. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the things worth having were the ones that scared you. The next morning, she called the number on the business card Marcus answered on the second ring. "Hale, it's Danielle," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've made my decision." There was a pause, and she could almost hear the smile in his voice when he spoke. "And I'll take the job." "Good," Marcus said, and the satisfaction in his tone was unmistakable. "Be at my office tomorrow morning at 9. We have a lot of work to do." He hung up before she could respond, and Danielle sat there for a moment, staring at her phone, a mix of excitement and terror coursing through her veins. She just agreed to work for Marcus Hale. What the hell had she gotten herself into? Chapter 4. The Hale Industries building was a towering monument of glass and steel, its sleek, modern design reflecting the morning sun like a beacon. Danielle stood on the sidewalk outside, staring up at the building and trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. She'd changed her outfit 3 times that morning, finally settling on a simple black blazer and slacks. Professional, but not too formal. Confident, but not arrogant. She could do this. She'd faced worse challenges than a new job. The lobby was all marble and minimalism with abstract art on the walls and a massive reception desk manned by a woman who looked like she belonged on a runway. Danielle approached, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "I'm here to see Marcus Hale," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Danielle Carter. He's expecting me." The receptionist typed something into her computer, then smiled, a polite, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Take the elevator to the 35th floor. Someone will meet you there." Danielle thanked her and made her way to the elevators, her heart pounding harder with every step. The ride up felt interminable, the numbers ticking by with agonizing slowness. When the doors finally opened, she stepped out into a sleek, modern office space filled with people moving with purpose, their faces focused and intense. A young man in a crisp suit approached her immediately. "Miss Carter, I'm David, Mr. Hale's assistant. Follow me, please." He led her through a maze of glass-walled offices and open workspaces, past conference rooms filled with people in heated discussions and cubicles, where employees stared at multiple monitors with fierce concentration. The energy here was electric, almost overwhelming, a far cry from the quiet, controlled atmosphere of Liada. David stopped outside a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. "Mr. Hale is finishing up a call," he said. "He'll be with you in a moment." Through the glass, Danielle could see Marcus pacing back and forth, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression intense. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit that made him look even more imposing than she remembered. And the way he moved, sharp, decisive, commanding, reminded her of a predator stalking its territory. He glanced up and saw her watching. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to slow. Then he gestured for her to come in. Danielle took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Marcus ended his call as she entered, setting his phone down on the massive desk that dominated the room. "Danielle," he said, his tone brisk but not unkind. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality." "Thank you for the opportunity," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. "Sit. We have a lot to discuss." She sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Marcus settled into his chair, leaning back with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room, which technically he did. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he said. "The work we do here is intense, high stakes, and unforgiving. We're dealing with billion-dollar deals, international partnerships, and technology that could change the world. One mistake, one miscommunication, and everything falls apart. I need people on my team who can handle that pressure without breaking." "I understand," Danielle said, keeping her voice steady. "Do you?" Marcus leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "Because working at a restaurant and working here are two completely different things. Here, you won't have the luxury of hiding in the background. You'll be in the room when decisions are made. You'll be the one translating contracts worth more money than most people see in a lifetime. And if you screw up, it's not just your job on the line. It's mine and the jobs of everyone in this building." His words were harsh, but not cruel. He was testing her, Danielle realized, seeing if she'd crumble under pressure. "I'm not afraid of pressure," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. "I've been handling it my entire life. The only difference is that now I'll actually be compensated fairly for it." Marcus's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Good answer." He stood and walked over to the window, gazing out at the city below. "Your first assignment is going to be a trial by fire," he said. "We have a meeting with a delegation from Japan next week. They're interested in partnering with us on a new AI project, but the negotiations have been rocky. Our previous translator wasn't great, and there's been a lot of miscommunication. I need you to review all the documents, sit in on the meetings, and make sure nothing gets lost in translation. Can you handle that?" Danielle's pulse quickened, but she nodded. "Yes, you sound confident." "I am." Marcus turned back to face her, his expression thoughtful. "I like that confidence is important in this business. But so is humility. Don't let your skills make you arrogant. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you start making mistakes." "I'll keep that in mind," Danielle said. He studied her for another long moment, then nodded. "David will get you set up with an office and introduce you to the team. Your salary will be triple what you were making at the restaurant, with full benefits and performance bonuses. But I expect results. If you can't deliver, we'll part ways. Understood." "Understood." "Good." Marcus extended his hand, and Danielle shook it, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. "Welcome to Hale Industries, Danielle. Let's see what you're really made of." The next few days were a whirlwind. Danielle threw herself into her new role with the same determination that had carried her through every challenge in her life. She spent hours poring over contracts, familiarizing herself with the technical jargon and industry-specific terminology. She attended meetings, shadowed senior executives, and took meticulous notes on everything. And Marcus was always there, watching. She'd catch him observing her during meetings, his gaze intense and unreadable. He'd drop by her office unannounced, asking pointed questions about her progress or challenging her interpretations of key documents. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure, and she found herself working harder than she ever had, driven by a need to prove herself, not just to Marcus, but to herself. One evening, a week into her new job, she was still at her desk long after most of the office had emptied out. She was reviewing a particularly dense section of the Japanese contract, cross-referencing legal terms, and making notes in the margins when Marcus appeared in her doorway. "You're still here," he said, leaning against the frame. Danielle looked up, startled. "I wanted to finish this section before tomorrow's meeting." Marcus walked into her office, his hands in his pockets. Most people would have gone home hours ago. "I'm not most people," Danielle said, echoing his earlier words back at him. He smiled, a real smile this time, one that softened the hard edges of his face and made him look almost approachable. "No, you're not." He moved closer, leaning over her desk to look at the documents spread out before her. "Find anything interesting?" "Actually, yes," Danielle said, pointing to a clause she'd highlighted. "This section here, it's phrased in a way that could be interpreted two different ways. In Japanese, the language is deliberately ambiguous. I think they're leaving themselves wiggle room in case the partnership doesn't go as planned." Marcus frowned, reading the section carefully. "Explain." Danielle walked him through the nuances of the phrasing, explaining how certain words in Japanese could carry multiple meanings depending on context. Marcus listened intently, asking sharp, incisive questions that showed he wasn't just hearing her, he was genuinely engaged. "So what do you recommend?" he asked when she finished. "I think we need to push for clarification before signing anything," Danielle said. "If snorts, they're being deliberately vague. There's a reason. We should know what that reason is before we commit." Marcus straightened, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. I'll bring it up at tomorrow's meeting." He started to leave, then paused at the door. "You're good at this, Danielle. Better than I expected." The compliment caught her off guard, and she felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you." Marcus's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and she could have sworn she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like admiration. Then he nodded and walked out, leaving her alone with her racing heart and the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. The meeting with the Japanese delegation was tense. The conference room was filled with executives from both sides, all seated around a massive table, their expressions carefully neutral. Danielle sat beside Marcus, her notepad open and her pen poised, ready to translate every word. The lead negotiator from the Japanese side, a stern-looking man named Mr. Tanaka, spoke in rapid Japanese, his tone formal and precise. Danielle translated seamlessly, her voice calm and confident as she conveyed his words to Marcus and the rest of the team. When Marcus brought up the ambiguous clause Danielle had flagged, Mr. Tanaka's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. He responded in Japanese, his words careful and measured. Danielle translated, "He says the clause is standard in Japanese contracts and that there's no cause for concern." Marcus looked at her, his gaze sharp. "What's your read?" Danielle hesitated for only a moment. "He's lying." The room went silent. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Mr. Tanaka. "Tell him we need explicit clarification, or we walk." Danielle translated Marcus's words, her voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. Mr. Tanaka's expression darkened, and he responded sharply. "He says that's unacceptable." Danielle translated, "He's threatening to take the deal elsewhere." Marcus smiled, a cold, predatory smile. "Tell him good luck finding another company with our technology." The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity, but finally Mr. Tanaka relented, agreeing to revise the clause with explicit terms. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus caught Danielle's eye and gave her a subtle nod. Acknowledgement, respect, maybe even gratitude. She felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with salary or status, and everything to do with earning the approval of someone she was beginning to genuinely admire. Later that evening, as the office emptied out, Marcus appeared at her door again. "Dinner," he said simply. "My treat. You earned it." "You." Danielle looked up from her computer, surprised. "Is this a work dinner?" Marcus's lips curved into a half-smile. "Does it matter?" She should have said yes. She should have kept things professional. But instead, she found herself grabbing her coat and following him out of the building, her heart racing with anticipation she couldn't quite name. Chapter 5. The restaurant Marcus chose was nothing like Liada. It was quieter, more intimate, a small Italian place tucked away on a side street with warm lighting and the smell of garlic and fresh bread filling the air. They were seated at a corner table away from the other diners, and for the first time since Danielle had started working at Hale Industries, Marcus seemed relaxed. "I come here when I need to think," he said, pouring them each a glass of wine. "It's one of the few places in the city where no one knows who I am." Danielle took a sip of her wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor. "You don't like being recognized. I don't like being treated differently because of my name." Marcus said, "When people know who I am, they either want something from me, or they're intimidated by me. It's exhausting." She studied him across the table, seeing a glimpse of the man beneath the CEO facade. "Is that why you come here? To be anonymous?" "Partly," Marcus admitted, "but also because the food is incredible. Try the carbonara. It's life-changing." They ordered, and as they waited for their meals, the conversation flowed more easily than Danielle had expected. Marcus asked her about her life before Hale Industries, her childhood, her family, the struggles that had shaped her, and to her surprise, she found herself opening up, sharing stories she rarely told anyone. "My mum worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat after my dad left," Danielle said, twirling her wine glass. "I watched her sacrifice everything for me, and I promised myself I'd make it worth it, that I'd find a way to succeed, no matter what it took. Learning languages became my way out, my ticket to something better." Marcus listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "Your mother sounds like an incredible woman." "She was," Danielle said quietly. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." "I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Thank you." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "My father was complicated. He built Hale Industries from nothing. But he was never satisfied. Nothing I did was ever good enough. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited the company, and everyone expected me to fail, to prove that I was just riding on his coattails." "But you didn't fail," Danielle said. "No," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "I didn't. But I also never got the chance to prove myself to him. And that stays with you." For a moment they sat in companionable silence, 2 people who'd both fought their way up from difficult circumstances, carrying scars they rarely showed the world. You know, Danielle said softly. I think that's why you were so hard on me at the restaurant. You saw someone claiming to be exceptional, and you couldn't believe it because you've had to prove yourself every single day of your life. Marcus met her gaze, and something shifted in his expression. Vulnerability, recognition, connection. Maybe you're right. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, favorite books, travel destinations, embarrassing childhood stories. Danielle found herself laughing more than she had in months, and Marcus's rare smiles became more frequent, his guard dropping with each passing moment. It wasn't until dessert arrived, a shared tiramisu that Marcus insisted she try, that Danielle realized how much the dynamic between them had changed. This wasn't just a boss taking an employee out to dinner. This was two people genuinely enjoying each other's company, the professional boundaries blurring into something more complicated. "Can I ask you something?" Danielle said, setting down her fork. "Of course. Why did you really hire me? Was it just because of the contract? Or was there something else?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze searching hers. "At first it was about the contract," he admitted. "You saved me from a disaster, and I needed someone with your skills. But after spending time with you, I realized it was more than that. You challenged me. You didn't back down when I tried to intimidate you. You saw through my and called me out on it. That's rare. So you hired me because I annoyed you," Danielle said, a teasing edge to her voice. Marcus laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that transformed his entire face. Something like that. Their eyes met and held, and Danielle felt her breath catch. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension, and for a moment she thought he might reach across the table and take her hand. But then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Marcus glanced at the screen and sighed. Work always work. He typed out a quick response, then set the phone down and looked at her apologetically. "I'm sorry. I know this is supposed to be a break from all that." "It's fine," Danielle said, even though part of her felt disappointed. "Comes with the territory." Marcus paid the bill, and they walked out into the cool night air. The city was alive with lights and sounds, but Danielle barely noticed. She was too aware of Marcus walking beside her, his presence commanding even in silence. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they reached her subway station. "I needed this." "So did I," Marcus said, his voice soft. He hesitated, as if wrestling with something, then stepped closer. "Danielle, I need to tell you something." Her heart raced. "What?" But before he could respond, his phone rang again. He cursed under his breath and answered it, his expression darkening as he listened. "When?" he said sharply. "How bad? I'll be there in 10 minutes." He hung up and looked at Danielle, frustration etched across his face. "I have to go. Crisis at the office. I'm sorry." "It's okay," Danielle said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Go. I'll see you tomorrow." Marcus nodded, but as he turned to leave, he paused and looked back at her. "What I was going to say, it can wait. But Danielle, tonight meant something to me. I hope you know that." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving her standing alone on the sidewalk with her heart pounding and 1,000 questions racing through her mind. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, contracts, and late nights at the office. The Japanese deal closed successfully, and Marcus credited Danielle publicly during a company-wide meeting, praising her skills and dedication. She felt like she was finally finding her place, building the career she'd always dreamed of. But the tension between her and Marcus only grew. They worked closely together, their professional chemistry undeniable. but there was always something more simmering beneath the surface. Lingering glances, moments of closeness that felt charged with possibility. And then, one Friday evening, everything changed. Danielle was working late again, reviewing documents for an upcoming deal, when Marcus appeared in her doorway. But this time he looked different, less composed, more uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course," Danielle said, setting down her pen. "What's going on?" Marcus stepped into her office and closed the door behind him. "I need to be honest with you about something, and I should have done this weeks ago. But I was a coward." Danielle's stomach dropped. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his expression pained. "That night at the restaurant, when I called you a liar, it wasn't just about the languages. I was testing you. I wanted to see how you'd react under pressure, if you'd crumble or fight back. I was planning to offer you a job even before you helped with the contract. I'd been watching you for weeks." Danielle felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You were watching me." "Not in a creepy way," Marcus said quickly. "I came to Le Jard for a business dinner, and I saw you. The way you handled difficult customers, the way you moved through the room with confidence and grace, I was impressed. So I had someone look into you, your background, your education, your skills. And when I found out about the languages, I knew I wanted you on my team. That whole confrontation at the restaurant, it was a test." Danielle stood up, her hands trembling with anger and betrayal. "A test? You humiliated me in front of your colleagues as a test. I know how it sounds." "You don't," Danielle snapped, her voice shaking. "You have no idea what it's like to be dismissed and belittled your entire life because of where you come from or what you do for a living. And you did it deliberately. You made me feel small on purpose." "I was wrong," Marcus said, his voice urgent. "I know I was wrong, but I needed to see if you were strong enough to work in my world. And you were. You are." "That doesn't make it okay," Danielle said, tears stinging her eyes. "You manipulated me. Everything. The job offer, the dinners, the compliments. It was all part of some calculated plan." "No," Marcus said. "Step."